My family swore I was a Navy deserter. I remained silent during my brother's decoration ceremony as a Special Forces commando. Then his general looked at me intently and said, "Colonel, are you here?" The crowd froze. My father's jaw dropped to the floor. The air grew thick as General Martinez's words echoed throughout the auditorium. I could feel hundreds of gazes piercing me like daggers, especially those of my father and mother in the front row. Their faces paled as if they had seen a ghost. Not just any ghost, but the ghost of betrayal they themselves had created. I am Michael, 34 years old, and for the past 8 years my family has told everyone that I abandoned the Navy out of cowardice. My father, Edward, a former lieutenant who never achieved the military glory he longed for, had made my supposed desertion his favorite topic during family gatherings. Michael couldn't stand even 3 months of basic training, he would repeat while serving whiskey to his friends. Thank God we have Alexander. He has what it takes. My mother, Carol, would nod with a mixture of shame and disappointment, as if I had stained the family name forever. The reality was completely different. I was recruited for a special operations unit so classified that I couldn't even reveal its existence to my own family. I signed confidentiality protocols that prohibited me from talking about my rank, missions, or location. While my family believed I was working at a small security company in the capital, I had led operations in more than 15 countries, rising to the rank of colonel in record time. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering was an exercise in restraint. "At least you found something you can handle," my father would say, patting my shoulder condescendingly while praising Alexander's basic achievements in his training. "Your brother will soon be a Special Forces Marine. Do you know what that means?" Of course I knew. I had trained several of them. Justice seemed unattainable while I maintained my vow of silence, but fate has unexpected ways of manifesting itself. When Alexander invited me to his graduation ceremony, I agreed to attend despite knowing how uncomfortable it would be. My younger brother wasn't to blame for our parents' lies. He really believed I had abandoned because that's what they had told him since he was 16. "I know this might be difficult for you," he wrote to me, "but it would mean a lot if you were there." I chose a seat in the back row, away from my family, wearing civilian clothes instead of the uniform that was rightfully mine. What no one in my family knew was that General Martinez, who would preside over the ceremony, had been my direct superior for 3 years in operations that remained classified. I watched as he stepped up to the podium with his characteristic stern bearing, how he adjusted the microphone and began to speak about honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that had forced me to endure years of family humiliation in silence. I saw Alexander receive his insignia with pride, my parents applauding with tears in their eyes from the front row. I also applauded discreetly, genuinely happy for my brother. That's when it happened. General Martinez paused, scanned the auditorium with his gaze, and his eyes stopped on me. I saw immediate recognition on his face, followed by something that seemed like indignation. "Before concluding," he said into the microphone, his voice resonating with authority, "I must recognize someone whose presence here today is as unexpected as it is honorable." A murmur ran through the room. "Colonel Michael, could you please stand up?" For a second, nobody moved. You could only hear the hum of the ventilation system and the timid creaking of chairs adjusting. I felt the world slow down, as if I were underwater. My eyes slowly rose and met Martinez's. He didn't blink. The same man who had ordered me on impossible missions in deserts, slums, and jungles now demanded my presence before hundreds of civilians and ranking officers. I swallowed hard. I stood up. The sound of my bench scraping the floor was, for a moment, the loudest noise in the venue. All faces turned in my direction. I recognized Alexander's with wide eyes and mouth agape, as if he had taken an invisible punch. My parents? God. Edward was static, glassy eyes, face flushed with shame or fury. Hard to tell. Carol brought her hand to her mouth as if wanting to contain a scream. I walked down the center aisle like a defendant heading to court. Each step echoed like a reminder of everything they had said about me in the last 8 years. The failure, the coward, the family shame. But there, in that moment, I was none of those things. I was Colonel Michael, officer of the Advanced Intelligence Special Operations Forces, a unit that, until recently, didn't even appear in public records. Martinez waited for me on stage. When I got close, he extended his hand firmly and looked at me with something between respect and remorse. This man saved lives in at least 15 countries. He led operations that changed the course of conflicts. And yet, he silently endured the shame imposed by a lie, he said, not hiding the emotion in his voice. "Today, as a general and as a man, I break protocol out of duty to justice," people murmured. The name Michael seemed to spread like wildfire among the officers present. Many knew who I was, at least in military circles. But for my family, for those I loved most, I was just the son who had given up. Martinez turned to me and hugged me, not as a symbolic gesture, but as someone who refuses to let a battle brother fall. Applause began discreetly, and gradually grew. The entire auditorium was on its feet, except my parents. In that moment, I confess, I wanted to turn around and face them, show them that the world had finally discovered the truth, that the disowned son had returned. But I resisted. That victory wasn't mine. It belonged to the men who had fallen beside me in missions that will never be recorded in history books. It was for them that I remained standing. Alexander was the first family member to stand up. He ran to me, still with the newly delivered insignia pinned to his uniform, and hugged me. A confused, tight, urgent hug. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he whispered. "Because I couldn't," I replied, holding the back of his neck as I used to when he was a child, and because no one wanted to believe me when it mattered most. When I stepped away, I looked one last time at my parents. Edward looked like a cornered animal. The man who always spoke loudly at family gatherings now couldn't even maintain his own gaze. Carol still had tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of joy. Martinez then concluded the ceremony. "On behalf of the Navy, I thank those who serve," he said. "But today, I also publicly apologize to those who served and were unjustly forgotten." I left the stage in silence. Nothing more needed to be said there. The damage and the impact had already been done. As I left the auditorium, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Isabella, my wife, who was watching everything through the private broadcast of the ceremony. A simple message. "Now they know. Come home when you're ready. I'm waiting for you." But I wasn't going home immediately. Something told me the real confrontation was yet to come. And for the first time in years, I was ready to face it. Few words were exchanged after the ceremony. Alexander looked at me with admiration and confusion. Carol seemed about to collapse, but avoided eye contact. Edward? Well, he simply left the auditorium before I even came down from the stage, muttering something inaudible while pushing chairs out of his way. Hours later, still in civilian uniform, and with the recognition medal discreetly stored in the inner pocket of my jacket, I accepted Alexander's invitation to have dinner with the family. "They want to talk," he said, with hope in his eyes that broke my heart. The restaurant was elegant, discreet, reserved table, away from other customers. I arrived last, as always. The table was silent. Edward with arms crossed, Carol looking at the menu without seeing anything. Alexander, beside me, was on his phone to break the discomfort. And Rose, our oldest aunt, was there too, probably Alexander's attempt to balance the emotions at the table. I sat down. The waiter came to take orders, but no one seemed willing to eat. When he walked away, the Cold War began. 8 years, Michael. Carol began, her voice tense, eyes fixed on the water glass. "You left us for 8 years without a word. And now you appear in an auditorium with a general calling you Colonel?" I took a deep breath. "I never left you. I was always nearby. But my mission didn't allow me to speak. Everything I did was by choice, yes, but also by duty." Edward let out a bitter laugh. "Duty? Abandoning your own family is duty now?" "No, Dad," I replied, trying to maintain control. "But fulfilling oaths is, and I swore confidentiality. I signed protocols. My life, and that of hundreds of soldiers, depended on my silence." "You could have given some sign, some explanation," Carol countered. "You made us believe you had failed." "I didn't make you believe anything," I interrupted, my voice firmer. "You chose to believe. You created the narrative. When I disappeared from the radar, when I stopped responding for mission security, you didn't look for answers. You invented a story and spread it." Edward slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware tremble. "And what did you want me to say? Huh? That my son vanished and nobody knew if he was alive or dead? I'm a former lieutenant, Michael. I have a reputation." "No," I retorted, feeling my blood boil. "You always had pride, but you never had the courage to defend your own son. It was easier to say I fled, that I was weak, than to admit you didn't know anything. You thought that would tarnish your name?" He didn't respond. Carol tried to soften the mood. "We just wanted to understand." That's when Isabella arrived. Nobody expected her. She was impeccable as always, with her access badge discreetly pinned to her lapel and a posture that mixed elegance and authority. She kissed my cheek and sat beside me. "Good evening," she said calmly. "I hope you're all well." I received authorization to speak about some points. Edward looked at her as if she were an intruder. "And who are you exactly?" "Isabella Michael," she replied, showing her wedding ring. "Senior analyst of the Strategic Intelligence Division. Colonel Michael's wife. And, more importantly, witness to everything he lived through in recent years." Everyone fell silent. "Michael served in operations whose details you'll never know," she continued. "And everything he endured, he did for the country. For honor. For you. Included. He was never weak. He was strong enough to endure in silence when his own family called him a coward. The silence was now absolute. And now?" Edward murmured. His voice choked. "You expect us to believe? Just like that suddenly?" "I'm not asking you to believe," I replied, facing him. "I'm telling you this is the truth, and I no longer need to hide it. And you'll deal with this however you want. But if you expect me to apologize for not being the son you expected, I'm sorry to disappoint you again." Rose finally spoke up. "I knew there was something wrong with this story from the beginning. I always knew you weren't a coward. Michael. But nobody listened. Nobody wanted to listen. They only talked about Alexander, as if you had never existed. And he wasn't to blame either," I completed, looking at my brother. "He was a victim of the same lie." Alexander shook his head, visibly emotional. "I believed it, Michael. Because Dad always spoke with such certainty. I feel like an idiot. You were a boy. You just wanted a hero in the family. And they gave you the most convenient story." The waiter appeared with the plates, but but nobody touched any.